Readability is the secret that turns you into a doctor. This is written at the 16th grade level, similar to a Supreme Court legal opinion. And this gets you rejected to medical school. This, 7th grade, and this makes you a doctor. In the first 3 months of the application cycle, our Premeds have over 60 interviews. I'll tell you why Premeds mistakenly think that complexity is impressive. I'll show you a framework I've never talked about before. The Harvard Law versus New York Times versus Harry Potter buckets of readability. Last, I'll use a simple tool named Hemingway and show you the step-by-step instructions to take a first draft to a simplified final draft in less than 5 minutes. You hated Shakespeare. Why write like him? There are 4 reasons that Premeds make the fatal mistake of overcomplicating our writing. First, the last application we wrote was to get into college. This was colorful, artistic, and filled with a whole bunch of meaningless fluff. And then we make the assumption that college admissions is the exact same as medical school admissions because we don't know any other admissions. But it's just the opposite. Simple works and fancy hurts. Second, what is the natural first thing that you do when you are starting to write your work and activities section? If you're anything like me, you pull up your resume. And your resume is a bunch of fancy sounding bullet points. So you're anchored on that writing and put it on this medical school application. But again, the incentives aren't aligned. Your resume explains what an EMT does. But on a medical school application, I couldn't care less. I've read thousands of EMT experiences. You're using a fork of a resume to eat your soup of a medical school application. Third, complex writing is paradoxically easier. For example, let's say you're an EMT for 2,000 hours. So on your work and activities entry, maybe you talk about the 12-lead EKG or the broken bones that you reduced and all the other medical emergencies. But that's non-specific and doesn't tell the reader how you grew from that experience. You restocking the ambulance does not tell us why your EMT experience mattered. Why it matters. Your entries must be clear as to why it matters. How did you grow from the experience? And I don't think there's a better explanation than this entry here of an EMT position where you'll see at the end, there's an entire paragraph dedicated to him reflecting on how this experience changed him. And I'll let you read it for yourself, but I want to highlight a couple of things. At Premed Catalyst, we focus on real pre-med applicants so you can get the most up-to-date information on what medical school admissions looks like today. Where else are you going to get up-to-date applications word for word for you to review? The answer is nowhere. And of course, if you're interested in how these pre-meds do, stay tuned, subscribe, and we'll keep you posted on where these pre-meds got accepted to. It's that this 700 hours is condensed into one single story. The single story of a patient who she and her family decided to stop chemotherapy because they wanted her to pass peacefully with her loved ones around her in a hospice facility, not in a hospital. And feel free to pause so you can really appreciate this story here, but together we'll read through the reflection. For several days after that trip, my thoughts returned to that patient and her family's suffering, conjuring very intense emotions that were difficult to cope with. Over time, experiences like that have led me to greatly mature as a person. After a lot of reflection and talking with my mentors, I understand that empathy and compassion are at the roots of medicine, and my own emotional well-being and ability to self-care are vital to preserve my effectiveness as a medical provider. And all of these big, large phrases of, it's just too much, it's just too hard to read, it's just not easy to follow. This is the example of writing that is just far too complicated. I've learned that no matter what situation I'm faced with, striving to do my absolute best each time helps me achieve a sense of peace and purpose. So it's very clear from this entry that being an EMT taught this author how to create space for a patient and her sister. It taught the author that medicine can be paradoxically both very beautiful because the family finally decided to stop the chemotherapy that was painful and causing this patient's weakness. But it also can concurrently be very ugly. The pain of saying goodbye to someone that you really love, and the emotions, very intense, that were difficult to cope with in the coming days. And while many of the sentences here are simple, like I held her hand, the ideas here are crystal clear. And don't let that fool you. It takes dozens of hours of adding, frustratingly deleting, and refining to get to that level of simplicity. And because it takes that much effort, that is the reason why most pre-meds don't get there. And that is a real work and activities entry from a 3.7 512 MCAT UCLA graduate. We broke down his entire application, and there are a ton of really good things that you cannot miss if you're applying to medical school. We answered why he earned 2 acceptances when tens of thousands of pre-meds with the exact same stats or better got in nowhere. You can see the whole thing on our application database. And every time we review another fresh new application, like Sam, who got into Kaiser in California, a $400,000 full ride scholarship, we'll add that application to the database so you always have fresh applications to learn from. More info in the link in the description box below. The last reason is a little real and a little raw. And we're gonna get deeper here for a second if that's okay. We write fancily because if the adjectives are complicated and the syllables are long, we create this illusion that maybe we know what we're talking about and we can hide behind that image. But we know if someone really took the time to read what we were writing and dug in between the lines, they'll see what we really think about ourselves, that we're truly just imposters, that we suck at communicating our ideas, or that our extracurriculars weren't as fantastic as they sound, and that ultimately we don't feel like we're ready to be doctors, that maybe someone else deserves it. I told you that this would get real, and if you feel that way, you're not alone. I'm a doctor. I make real decisions for real patients every day. Real people who are fathers and security guards at the local gym and basketball aficionados just like me. And I still feel like an imposter. But the answer here is not to write a complicated application that you can hide behind. Your fancy writing won't change the feeling inside. The opposite is true, and it's actually very freeing when you write genuinely and clearly, communicating exactly who you are. Then adcoms get to really see you for you, and that is a beautiful relationship. Why should you care about readability? There are 2 reasons to care. First, imagine you're an adcom. It's the holiday season and you've already read 20 applications. You've seen 20 scribes, 20 EMTs, and 20 medical emergencies in personal statements. You've got 5 more before you call it a day, head to the playground to play with your son on this fantastic Friday afternoon. Then you look on your computer and you see this entry. Readability matters, and this next entry will prove it to you. Again, I'll let you read it on your own, but I want to highlight a couple of these sentences that are just really difficult to get through. Sentences like, as the project manager, I had to intimately understand this population's social determinants of health and how this affected their day-to-day lives. Or this doozy of a sentence, we aim to eradicate these social barriers methodically, vocational and rehabilitation therapy to make up for educational gaps, a free clinic to help bridge patients until they can establish long-term care, and offering a support system while they get back on their feet. Whew, holy cow, that took 3 breaths. And you can directly contrast that to some of the simpler sentences that are in this entry. For example, others couldn't afford the treatment they needed, and when money became tight, homelessness followed quickly after. Yeah, I'm sorry, but if my son is waiting to go to the playground with me, I'm going straight to the playground. I am not reading this entry again. The Compassion Project and the multi-step campaign and the large population of homeless individuals interacting with a variety of the homeless and the healthcare system and the logistical barriers and the project manager and understand and social determinants of health and all of these big, large phrases of formulating a plan of action and eradicating social barriers, vocational, rehabilitational, educational, a free health clinic. It's just too much. It's just too hard to read. It's just not easy to follow. And this is the real first draft from one of our students. And just like with every student we support, we simplified her writing. She now has multiple interviews, including to Kaiser, a school that offers full ride scholarships. If you're finding this helpful, it'd be an honor to help you become a doctor too. If you're applying to medical school soon, learn more about us in the link in the description box below. Readability matters because it matters to your audience. The adcom who is going to advocate to interview you or reject you. The second, more practical reason you should care, because this is the most simple, highest yield way to triple the quality of your experience. Your application strength is based on 2 things: how strong your extracurriculars are and how well you write about them. You could strengthen your extracurriculars, build Khan Academy, and I guarantee you that you'll get into medical school. Unfortunately, doing that would take you 10 years. You could also improve your writing. Maybe you ask a friend to look it over. It takes a couple days to get back and forth, and that comment that your friend left was kind of confusing. And then this other suggestion that your friend made, you don't really like or agree with. And then wait, your friend didn't even get into medical school. Is this the right person to ask? Or you can improve your writing just by simplifying it. You can use tools like Hemingway to lower the grade level. And you can add onto that our step-by-step approach to make sure that you're not doing things to overcomplicate your writing. This takes minutes, not days, not years, and certainly not decades. And arguably, it's the most effective way because you strengthen the direct relationship that you have between you and the admissions committee reader. The 3 readability buckets. The average adult reads at about the 9th grade level. Harvard Law writes at about the 15th grade level. It's something that looks and feels like this. Welcome to the 15th grade. You've made it to Harvard Law, and this is what it sounds like. This is Obergefell versus Hodges, and there's a Justia summary. Michigan, Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee define marriage as a union between one man and one woman. Plaintiffs challenged the laws as violating the 14th Amendment. The district courts ruled in their favor. The 6th court consolidated the cases and reversed. The Supreme Court reversed. The 14th Amendment requires a state to license a marriage between 2 parents of the same sex and to recognize a marriage between 2 people of the same sex when their marriage was lawfully licensed and performed out of state. Oh gosh, here is where it gets crazy. The fundamental liberties and the change in the institution of marriage based on interracial marriage and the use of contraception and the abandonment and the law of coverture. I don't even know what that is. The centerpiece of social order and fundamental child rearing, procreation and education and initial inclination. Why does everything rhyme? Legislation and litigation and debate, referenda, legislative debates, more debates, and grassroots campaigns. This is the example of writing that is just far too complicated. The New York Times reads at the adult average about that 10th grade level. Something like this. Welcome back to the 10th grade. We're going to the New York Times in this fantastic article about the perfect chocolate chip cookie. Calling your chocolate chip cookie perfect is a bold move, but the British pastry chef Ravneet Gill had no problem doing it. So far, no one has contested her claim. I like the simple music, almost melodic kind of flow to the writing. Skip to this 3rd paragraph here. People got to baking and shared the results on Instagram. The photos showing a cookie split in 2 with an ideal wet sand crumb surrounding a glossy pool of vicious molten chocolate. So, right, it's just a touch above what you would expect for an elementary school or middle school kid, but most adults will be able to read this. But remember, we're not going for Harvard Law. We're not going for New York Times. We're going for Harry Potter. And that's at about the 6th to 8th grade level. And here we go, what we are looking for, that 7th grade Harry Potter level. And here is one of my favorite scenes. Harry had never even imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles that were floating in midair over 4 long tables where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. Simple, your 7th grader can read it, very descriptive. You don't let the writing get in the way of the story and the imagery and the impact and the reflections that you have along your pre-med journey. You don't let your writing confuse and get in the way of all of that. But Mike, grade 9 is the adult average. Why are we going to dumb it down? I love this explanation from the Hemingway software itself. Grade 9 is the adult average, but low grade levels do not make your writing childish. Instead, they show that complexity isn't getting in the way of your message. You don't have to fix every highlight. Fix only as many as you need to make the writing more clear. You are applying to medical school to become a doctor, and you will get in based on the impact of your extracurriculars and how well you can communicate you've grown from them. These are shared through stories and data and meaningful reflection. And when you overcomplicate your writing, you fog up the mirror. The image becomes murky and unclear. So write simply. Do not let your writing get in the way of your story. The Hemingway effect. Now, how exactly do you simplify complex writing? You can try to define simple, but it's a bit of a spectrum and a moving target. Instead, let's flip it and let's define what complicated writing is. Complicated writing is easier to define, and once we get there, we can just avoid those things. Complicated writing has jargon. You have to look up words that you don't know. Complicated writing has many compound sentences. You should be able to comfortably read a sentence out loud with just one breath. Complicated writing makes you stumble. Read the writing aloud and mark all the places that make you feel stuck. And lastly, complicated writing tends to use the passive voice. We can search for all the conjugations of to be, the was, the wers, the ares, and replace all of those with active voice. And so the guaranteed checklist to write simple writing becomes to avoid all of those things. Here's an example of a first draft from our students written in the 15th grade. And here we go, what we are looking for, that 7th grade Harry Potter level. And here is one of my favorite scenes. Harry had never even imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles that were floating in midair over 4 long tables where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. Simple, your 7th grader can read it, very descriptive. You don't let the writing get in the way of the story and the imagery and the impact and the reflections that you have along your pre-med journey. You don't let your writing confuse and get in the way of all of that. Here is a real first draft from one of our students written in the 15th grade level, that Harvard Law no level. I'll let you pause so you can read this on your own, but I do want to highlight 2 major issues with this entry. For one is the use of jargon. You can take a look at this sentence here. Not only do I use various equipment for refractive, cataract, and glaucoma consultations, I mean, the fact of the matter is most of us don't know what a refractive consultation is, or what a cataract is, or what glaucoma is. And so using these jargon, these pieces of language, alienates people that aren't ophthalmologists or aren't optometrists, and it doesn't have them feel included in your writing. And the next major issue is what I call a violation, in fact, a gross violation of the breath test, that every sentence you say should be doable within 1 normal breath. Take a look at this sentence here. Giving a voice and platform to our patients is a skill I picked up as I continued working in clinic. My favorite physicians when visiting for doctor's appointments were the ones who tended to not look at the computer while I'm talking, but rather directly look at me when hearing about my medical issues before writing them down in the chief complaint section. Oh man, that was a fail. I had to take a huge deep breath, turn into Mickey Mouse, and read at a lightning quick pace. That is not a single sentence that should be broken down into 3, 4, if not 5 simple sentences. Here's an example of a first draft from one of our students written in the 11th grade. Now we're taking a look at one of the later drafts written at an 11th grade level, so still not quite there yet. The 2 takeaways I want you guys to focus on here is the use of passive voice. The 2 takeaways that I want you guys to focus on here is the use of passive voice and the stumble or stuck test. Let's start with passive voice. So starting from the top, Rocklatan is rejected because it requires prior authorization. Passive voice. 2 days later, the PA is rejected. Passive voice. Multiple documents are sent back and forth. Passive voice. This scenario is just one of many. Passive voice. Working in healthcare has exposed me to systemic issues. Passive voice. When you write in passive voice, And if you want to see 8 full medical school applications that were memorable to medical schools, check out our application database. It features applications that have been accepted to UCLA Full Ride, UCSF, UCSD, USC, and it even includes my own application that got me into UCLA medical school. You traditionally sounds just weaker. Oftentimes the sentences are longer, but also it feels like the sentence itself, there's no agency, there's no owner of the verb. And most importantly, it's very easy to fix. Just change it to the active voice and it often will sound better. The next is the stumble or stuck test. When you read a couple of sentences and the flow is a little choppy, you feel like you have to break up your words or your phrases to get them out in a consistent way. And sometimes you're reading something that you don't fully understand and you have to go back and reread it again. These are choppy, stuck, poor flow sentences that we'll want to notice and change when we notice them. And the best way to do it is to read them out loud. For example, let's take a look at the 2nd and 3rd paragraphs. I encountered countless individuals who skipped their prescriptions because of the lack of insurance coverage. It's some of that weird doubling up, right? Encountered countless because of the cost or lack of insurance coverage. It doesn't flow very well. I also met people who postponed essential glaucoma and corneal surgeries, risking their sight due to cost or insurance obstruction. I just said cost or lack of insurance coverage, and now I'm saying cost or insurance obstruction. It seems redundant for no reason. Working in healthcare has exposed me to systemic issues, revealing that the current system needs a revolution beyond my control. While I await this change, I strive to help in any way I can, advocating for each patient I care for. So those two sentences, you can see, flowed much better than the last paragraph. And so in this scenario, I would focus heavily on cleaning up the flow in that second paragraph, because when I read it aloud, it sounded odd. And your ears and your brain are well attuned over your 2 decades of life to recognize when something just sounds kind of off. And here's an example of a final draft written in the 8th grade. And lastly, we have the final draft, which incorporates our improvements. The insurance company rejects Rocklatan because it requires prior authorization. You can see it's active voice. I spent 15 minutes filing out the PA and then called my patient to explain the delay. 2 days later, they reject the PA, active voice. I file a written appeal and make lengthy phone calls to support the need for this medication. The insurance company and our clinic send dozens of documents back and forth, active voice. Several weeks later, my patient finally receives their medication. These moments made me wonder. Simple sentences, flows very well. Why do insurance companies, not doctors, dictate medical care? Flows very well. This scenario is one that's actually passive voice, but I think the opposite would have made it a little bit too clunky, so we chose to stick with a passive voice. This scenario is one of many that prompted me to reflect on the current healthcare system, because the opposite would be the current healthcare system made me reflect on the many scenarios. It was kind of clunky, right? I've met many patients who skipped their prescriptions. Without coverage, they couldn't afford them. Just how simple is that writing? I've served many patients who postponed essential glaucoma and corneal surgeries. Still a little bit of jargon, but we removed refractive, right? We removed anything that we don't need. Their vision was at risk because of costs and insurance obstruction. Again, it's not that passive voice is 100% wrong. It's most of the time, active voice will be better, but if you try to write an active voice, in this case, costs and insurance obstruction risked their vision or something like that, it would not have really made a lot of sense. My work in healthcare has exposed me to systemic issues. They show that the current system needs a revolution beyond my control. While I await this change, I strive to help in any way I can, advocating for each patient I care for. I want to transform healthcare with other future doctors. I hope together we can find a sustainable solution to give patients the care they deserve. That is an 8th grade level. That is what a final draft is looking like. Compare that to the 15th grade first draft, and you will see a world of a difference. Simple language highlights complex ideas. And when you have rich experiences and meaningful patient interactions, you want your writing to get out of the way. You want the stories to speak for themselves. Aim for Harry Potter, not Harvard Law. And if you liked this video, you'll love this video where we compare first and final drafts of work and activities sections. See you soon.